wanna give up, fall down, I just gotta get up, hey. Yeah, this is my road, lights, camera, action, I'm ready to go. Way too long, we faced them storms, now you gon' face the dawn you waited for. I said from night to dawn, I right my wrongs alone, in competition with warnings, ice galore. Now I'm running toward it, my lights unfinished, being a quitter, but little by little, they joking, telling some.
You're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show on WNHHLP 103.5 FM, your home for community radio. Sitting in for Tom today is Jesse Turner.
All right. Welcome, New Haven. Welcome, 103.5 FM. And we have two exciting faculty members from the University of Kentucky. We have one of America's social justice deans, Julian Vasquez, and an NAACP superstar and new faculty member at the UK, Gregory Vincent. And we've got a great show today on an initiative that is unprecedented. It goes, to me, there's an initiative that's a project, a collaboration between the NAACP and the University of Kentucky. And to me, this is reminiscent of the land-grant colleges institutions. It is unique in that place, and it's the only one like it in the nation. So before we get into that, I'd like to say, Dr. Vasquez, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your passion and maybe give a plug for the University of Kentucky, the rising star?
Well, thanks so much for having me back on. It's good to be here. And I just want to give a shout out to the University of Kentucky community, the alums, go Cats. Passion. I was thinking about that right before we got on. You had said that you wanted us to talk a little bit about that. And the first thing that came to mind was my mother, who told me, you want to leave the world a better place than you found it. You want to leave a legacy. And so I think that is the essence of what I do, is I want to leave a legacy, a positive legacy. As an educator, as a person who has conducted research spanning several topics, charter schools, high stakes testing, et cetera, as a person who has volunteered in the modern civil rights movement for about the last decade, I want to leave a positive legacy, especially for communities of color, for historically marginalized students. That's what gives me passion. That's what wakes me up in the morning. And as a leader of a college of 3,000 students, faculty, and staff, one of the top 30 public colleges of education in the nation, be a leader that is community engaged and community relevant. I think my generation of leaders wants to think about how we build consensus in our communities, how we do that in a way that involves community engaged governance. So that's what I'm passionate about.
All right. We can't ask for anything better. And then Professor Gregory Vincent, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your passion?
Absolutely. First of all, I got to give a shout out to my dean. Let me say that we are so fortunate to have Dean Heilig both at the University of Kentucky and in higher education. To share a little bit, it's all about connections and relationships. And one of the real joys of my career was when I served as vice president professor at the University of Texas. I had the opportunity to recruit then Dr. Heilig out of Stanford University to come join our faculty. And what I will say in these 15 years is that he's always spoken truth to power. He has always used his voice to uplift the community while also providing groundbreaking and innovative scholarship. And I could not be more honored to join him and the faculty to do this work. And you asked about passion, and Dean Heilig talked about his mother. Certainly my mother and my parents. They held those standards. My mother served on the community school board in New York City for 13 years. And one of the things I loved about her and watching her in action was that she fought for every child like that child was her own. And that's what she instilled in me. My other passion, and I'm so fortunate that I have my daughter who has joined us, and she is a proud graduate of Spelman College, and she's currently in graduate school at Georgetown University, and she is doing a phenomenal job. And she's an educator. She's a public historian. And I'm just so honored to have her join and represent the rest of the Vincent family. So I thank you, sweetheart, for joining. And then finally, my passion, and I know we'll get into it. Yesterday marked the anniversary of Thurgood Marshall being named to the U.S. Supreme Court. And he is the person, along with Charles Hamilton Houston, that we are trying to honor and bring to life even today. And so those are just some of the passions. But again, in the interest of time, I'll stop there.
No problem. But, if Camille is on, she could say hello. She could give us a shout out. I do see a name. I don't know if her audio's on, but we're fine.
She's muted, but she could definitely join us.
All right.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for having me today.
And are you working on your doctorate over there at Georgetown, Camille?
I'm working on my master's.
Well, you know what? We have a really high quality ed policy master's at the University of Kentucky. We have top 10 departments. One of the top public universities that has an education school. So we'd like to see you at Kentucky.
Well, you always the recruiter, and we've been talking about that very issue. So stay tuned, my brother. Stay tuned. But she looks good in blue. She looks good in blue. That's close to that Spelman blue. So it looks pretty good. Looks pretty good.
We might be able to get you some basketball tickets too. I don't know.
Well, Camille, we could always bring you to Connecticut. And by the way, we wear blue too.
Oh, you look.
It's a bidding battle. Okay. Let's get to business now. This initiative could not have come at a better time in our nation. I mean, with George Floyd, with Breonna Taylor, with 1,000 murders of Black lives in the nation, with voter suppression. I mean, I'm in Connecticut. In 2016, the Connecticut State Supreme Court issued the decision that said the state of Connecticut is not responsible to provide a quality and equitable education for Black and Brown and special education children, just access to an education. So I mean, the components for when I look at the disconnect between sometimes our justice system, of course, our police departments, and our universities. This is what makes it unique. So I'm going to start with Julian, because both Julian and Vincent, both you have a history, an NAACP history, and I'm a proud member of the NAACP as well. I'd like you to give us to talk about the initiative, but sort of the uniqueness of it, because I'm not aware. We do have the NAACP. Central Connecticut State University is in New Britain, and we have a close relationship, but not a partnership, doing this work. So maybe, Julian, you could kick us off. What's unique about it? Is it, tell us.
Yeah. Well, so first let me start with a little background in history. So when I was at UT Austin, I was working with Gary Bledsoe, who's the president of the Texas State Conference. If you go to NAACP conventions, you can spot him because he's wearing a cowboy hat, Texan cowboy hat. And so we did a lot of work with him, the representation of African Americans in the social studies standards, complaints to the U.S. Department of Education, Civil Rights Division. We did a lot of work. And so when I arrived in California, the President Bledsoe told President Alice Huffman, Julian's coming to Cal State, and you should put him to work. That's essentially how she tells the story. And so I started working as the education chair in California for the state conference, and was serving on the executive committee. Well, as you know, in 2016, the NAACP passed a resolution calling for a moratorium on charter schools until community concerns were addressed. Folks, took notice of that. Now, the NAACP had several resolutions, national resolutions, from their national conference about charter schools and about education, but this particular resolution was national news. Well, after the resolution, the NAACP put together a task force, an education task force, and that task force traveled to many different states in 2016 and 17. Well, after that task force, a new resolution came to the membership at the 2017 National Convention, calling for a new institute. The next year, President and CEO Derek Johnson came to the California State Conference convention. And I had the duty of taking him to the airport at 4 o'clock in the morning. And in that drive between the hotel and the San Francisco airport, I said to him, I said, President Johnson, the perfect place, I think, for a center like this, for an initiative like this, would be a higher education institution. And he said, you know what, that's an interesting idea. Let's talk about that. So fast forward another year, and I was interviewing for dean at the University of Kentucky. And I sat down with the provost last summer and I said, I think that Kentucky would be the place to host a new, exciting, first of a kind, one of a kind collaboration like this. And the provost said, let's explore it. So it took about a year. So a lot of folks think that the timing was right because of the pandemic of racism that we are addressing this summer, the protests, the concerns about police brutality, African-American men getting shot in the back, knees on their necks. This has been a summer of a rising consciousness, I think. And so it just happened that we had been working on this for a year. And I think that this center arrives at the right time. Because folks, if you ask voters, what are you passionate about? One of those top 5 topics, unprompted, will be education. And so considering the history of the NAACP, the recent history, and the pandemic of racism that we're addressing in the midst of the COVID pandemic, I don't think that this center could arrive at a more perfect time. And I'm going to tell you, this center couldn't have a more perfect leader. In January, we actually recruited Greg Vincent. At the time, he's Grand Sire Archon of the Boulé, and he has been a president, a vice president. He's been at Oregon and LSU and the University of Texas and assistant attorney general for civil rights in the state of Ohio. He has credentials like no one else in the United States to lead this work. He built the Division of Diversity and Community Engagement from the ground up at the University of Texas. And so this initiative, this work is in good hands. And we have a young African-American sister from University of Colorado Boulder who was trained by Kevin Wellner, and she's going to be the assistant director. And I should tell you now, let me break a little news. We're also recruiting some other folks to lead the center. I can't tell you who they are, but you know the names. So just stay tuned. We're going to do some more exciting things.
We love it. We love it. And Professor Vincent, could you tell us how you got involved in this work? I know that Julian stole you, from what I'm hearing. It was like a free agent kind of thing. And I don't know if he offered you a golf game or ride in his Maserati. He's a big foodie. I should be serious, but no.
I drive a Jeep. There's some charter school people out there that would love to say I drive a Maserati. So let's just make that clear. I drive a Jeep.
And he does eat those crazy, what do they call them, hash browns at Waffle House or something. I don't know.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, they're good. All right. Sorry. Back to this is serious work.
No. And thank you again. And thank you for those kind words, Dean. I will share that all 4 of Camille's grandparents were life members of the NAACP. So we come by this work, and it's been deeply ingrained, in us as well. So, and I had the honor of joining Derek Johnson and leading a delegation of members of the Boulé to Ghana on the year of return in 2019. And so I will also say that we enjoy great leadership from the NAACP. And so we're excited about that partnership. And I think that's the big difference. There are relationships between local universities and the NAACP chapters. I enjoyed a very good relationship with Gary Bledsoe. He was a proud double graduate of the University of Texas. As the dean mentioned, what makes this unique is this formal partnership at the highest levels between the NAACP and the University of Kentucky. And I just, in addition to it takes great leadership and vision. And in our President Capilouto, the Provost Blackwell, and of course our Dean, that's what really brought this together. And I think it's important to note that this also occurred before these twin pandemics hit we always had systemic racism, right? But also this COVID-19. And so this really speaks to the courage and the vision of our dean and the support from the top leadership. I want to pick up on something that you mentioned, Brother Turner, around court decisions. This election, do not get distracted. This election is about the courts. With all of the chaos that's happened in the current administration, the one place where they have been ruthlessly efficient is appointing judges that appear to be, and in practice, have begun to become hostile to the interest of the permanent interest of communities of color. And we can go from immigration to education. The case that you cited shows the complete reversal of the power of the Brown decision. The Brown decision said, if you offer it, you have to do it on equal terms. And this shows a full throat reversal of that work. And so part of our work has to be, how do we permanently guarantee these rights to an equal education? Because in that Brown 1, not Brown 2, but Brown 1, what it talks about is that a child cannot be expected to fully participate in our democratic society without a quality education. I also point out, and again, I want to give my condolences to the Bozeman family, Chadwick Boseman. Yeah. He did a great job in Black Panther, but I wanted to focus on Marshall. And if you recall, the case that he dealt with was actually a criminal case. And the NAACP worked on cases of lynching, restricted covenants, employment, all of these cases. But with the brilliance of Charles Hamilton Houston and Thurgood Marshall and other great lawyers, they focused on education because they believed that if they could fix education, they could address a number of these other issues that face our community. And they were right. And they did meet that Brown 1 really did reflect the pinnacle. And then you had the backtrack. You had the attacks on that. Put another way, we didn't really have our first successful integration case through the Supreme Court, the Charlotte v. Mecklenburg, until the 70s, right? Brown was decided in 1954. You don't get to 1970 till you start seeing these, and then the backlash begins. And far from it being just a Southern issue, we saw this in New England and New York, right? So let's not make this just, it's just about the South, right? So we know that those issues are there, but our laser focus is going to be on education. Our laser focus is going to be, how do we ensure that every child gets a quality education that tells the truth? Because I think that's the other tragedy, is that we have been whitewashing and sugarcoating our history and not telling what really is about what's true about our country. And that's why I also want to raise up the name of Congressman John Lewis, because what he said was that by telling the truth, fighting for justice is the most patriotic thing you can do. And so one of the things we must do are create equitable, anti-racist curricula that can be properly taught in the schools so that we can tell the truth about where we were, where we are, and where we can go.
Perfect. It's one of the things, as I looked at some of the bullets in the UK University of Kentucky announcements, one of them was the rapid release of research summaries, and this is crucial. One of the great things about how I came to know Julian was not face to face. It was by reading the work that he was doing on Teach for America, on charter schools, on all the prolific, his blog, Cloak and Inequity. He's a prolific writer, research briefs. I'm just like, when I put up my stuff for promotion, I'm like, please don't let him be the person that you compare to, okay? You know, I'm talking about 50, publications. And he's got his finger on that idea that the social media and the connection, but the potential to bring the research from via the center, because I work at an institution of higher ed, and we know they're dominated by men like me. And you can't always trust that men like me are going to be an ally or understanding, or there's that pandemic we talked about of racism and hatred. That's a 400-year-old pandemic that we're talking about in this country. So the idea that you'll be able to disseminate research, and from a perspective of communities of color, and the focus, when I went down the list, it said the focus would be, I think it was pre-K to higher ed, and symposiums and workshops, and assistants and working and graduate assistants and all those things. So Camille, your daughter, is probably going to say, yeah, Dad, when are you going to get me one of those graduate assistants at the University of Kentucky, so could you tell us about the importance of disseminating truth? Yeah. And that's what we're talking about here, truth, that I think in school, and Julian is a dean of the School of Education, and there's only a few deans who are in that social justice dean collaborative.
Yeah.
How do we ensure that truth gets disseminated? Isn't that part of the new initiative?
Yeah. Well, let me tell. Can I tell a story real quick? Yeah. Give a shout out, and then sort of set the table for Dr. Vincent. I think in 2018, I'm just going to tell a story. So in 2018, at the National Convention, they were handing out tickets to go see the new movie about Thurgood Marshall. The Marshall movie, #Marshall movie. And so I said to myself, I'd love to see that movie. That's a history that we don't hear as much about. I didn't know anything about the particular case that the movie took up. So I went to the private viewing. It was before the film had come out. It was just NAACP convention folks. And I was watching the movie, enjoyed it. And after the movie, Chadwick Boseman came out for a private conversation about the movie at the screening. Blew me away. And I tweeted a picture of that private screening and that private conversation with Chadwick, and such a talented, I mean, Jackie Robinson, Thurgood Marshall, Wakanda Forever. It is just incredible, his roles. And I think he'll be a lionized, like so many of our stars that were dimmed too soon. Then just quickly, there's a group called the Education Deans for Justice and Equity. It's a group of deans across the United States who are laser focused on these topics. And I was honored to be asked to serve on the steering committee this past week. So stay tuned. We've got some new ideas. And I think you'll become very aware of this group over the next several months, because there's several things that they are planning to roll out. So Education Deans for Justice and Equity. It's led by Kevin Kumashiro. And then finally, what I think is great about this center is that this is not a pie in the sky idea. So often you hear, oh, we're going to do this center and we'll figure the rest out later. We started this work last year. We hired the faculty already. We've already committed $750,000 to the center. It's already happening. And so now, like I said, the table's been set. And there's a lot of ideas out there. One is a place like the National Education Policy Center at University of Colorado, but specifically focused on African-American Black faculty. So a set of fellows from institutions across the United States, creating rapid response policy briefs for communities. getting ideas for research from communities. I mean, typically when faculty do research, we have an idea, we execute that idea. But how do we do community listening sessions so that our faculty at UK and our research fellows are able to draw new ideas from communities for the kinds of research that they want us to do, and how we can do that work collaboratively. So a new paradigm, instead of the sort of colonial way that we do research, a more community engaging, community-based way. And Dr. Vincent has several initiatives that he has on the tracks already and planned. And let me just turn it back to him.
Well, you shared a wonderful story, and I'll quickly raise up one as well. You know, Brother Bozeman, he benefited from going to a historically Black college and university, Howard University, and he was mentored by Felicia Rashad, who was also a proud graduate. And of course, we know the Democratic candidate for vice president is a proud graduate of Howard as well. I mentioned that Camille's a Spelman graduate. Her younger brother is a current senior at Morehouse. And I'll share very quickly something about him that blew me away. And I asked him, I said, now that you're a senior, what do you enjoy most about Morehouse? And he said, the diversity. He said, if you control for race and gender, my fellow Morehouse brothers are diverse, socioeconomic, sexual orientation, religion, geographic, international status. And so we have to talk about, we can't talk about our communities as monoliths, right? You know, even though we have common experiences, and we also bring a rich diversity. And so it's not either or, it's both and. So I just wanted to raise that up. Let me talk a bit about this nimble, reliable research that will be a hallmark of this center. We have to address the needs of the community. We can't wait. You know, as you know so well, Brother Turner, that sometimes the production cycle could be 18 months, 2 years. We don't have the luxury of waiting. And so, as the dean mentioned, one of the things we're doing, we want to respond. And one of the things that really blew me away from the dean's quote in the Washington Post article was decolonize this work. And I think that's so important. And so one of the things we're going to do very quickly in partnership with the NAACP is address how COVID-19 is impacting our community, and particularly the return to school. We are going to partner with the National Medical Association. That was established in 1895 by a group of Black doctors. And we're also going to work with national education organizations as well. The beauty of this is that we can, through social media, through other venues, we can get good, reliable information out to our community. This program is a great example of that. And it's all about partnerships. And I'm going to end by giving another shout out to the dean. As he mentioned, I served as grandsire, the head of the Sigma Pi Phi, the first Black Greek letter organization founded in 1904 by 6 physicians. And to just quickly fast forward, I think it's very important that several counties have now said that racism is a public health crisis. So they're linking racism to public health. And I think we need to do, we're going to impact that as well. But one of the things we did is that we answered the call of President Obama with My Brother's Keeper. And as you all know, he initiated that after the killing of Trayvon Martin to help mentor young men and boys of color. And because of Dr. Heilig's expertise, along with another one of our dear friends and brothers, Richard Reddick, who's an expert in mentoring, I asked them to create a white paper. And they did that quickly. It then became the basis, the blueprint for mentoring. So when people say, I don't know how to mentor, here's the blueprint. So around the country, because of his research, and then Dr. Heilig and Dr. Reddick turned that into a peer-reviewed article. So they got the benefit of that while they were going up for tenure. We got the benefit of on-the-ground, reliable information that really talented men in the community could use to say, oh, okay, this is how we do constellation mentoring. This is how we do group mentoring. And so it made such an impact. And that's the kind of work where we can go from the ivory tower to the community to make an immediate impact. So I wanted to use that as one concrete example.
And, Jesse, you talk about the blog work and the Twitter work and LinkedIn. I've worked really hard over the last, I don't know, 10 years or so to do that work in social media for this exact purpose. I think so often people think that you do social media because you are focused on being out there or tooting your own horn. But I do it because I share because I care. I share the work that I do because I care, because the average peer-reviewed article is read by less than 10 people, according to research. The average academic book is read by less than 100 people.
And that's what you assign it in your class.
Right, exactly. And so the point of this is that a lot of this really important work that scholars are doing often sits on the shelf and gathers dust. And so I think that the genesis, the meta idea of this center is how can we make the work that we do not only with communities, but for communities so that it could be engaged in those public conversations. That's why we do the social media work. That's why we're doing the Civil Rights Center, is because we want communities to have access to good information. In this era of hashtag fake news and propaganda and think tanks and policy patron foundations, it's key that communities have access to reliable, unbiased information. And this center will be able to do that for the NAACP, making research available to national, to the state conferences, to the local communities. And it'll be able to do it for school board members and policymakers, legislators, et cetera. Because in this era of hashtag fake news, good information for communities is key.
All right, perfect. But let me, when we think about, for me, the key to breaking an academic silo, I think is you've got part of that. You said there will be community listening sessions. Mm-hmm. And while I'm impressed with articles and research briefs, what would be more beneficial to the public schools I work with would be help with curriculums that deal with truth, that deal with history. In Connecticut, we love to pass mandates and laws without any funding. That's what we love to do, Professor Vincent. And so last year, the high school students in our state successfully lobbied and got a bill passed by the legislature that indicated that starting in 2021, that Black and Latino history would be taught or would be part of the curriculum at our high schools. And this was a major victory. But as we're listening now, what are we hearing from our teachers and what are we hearing from our students? There's been no funding. There's no training. So a majority of our teachers, I think at the last count in Connecticut, are something like 87% white. And all of a sudden, and if I look at those history teachers, the percentage may even be higher. Are they prepared to teach Black and Latino history? That kind of concept. So,
well, I got something for you, Walker, man. I got something for you. You ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Okay. So as you know, in Texas was the first state recently where the State Board of Education, last year they passed Latinx studies. This year they passed Black studies. First state to have statewide courses focused on those two populations, Texas. And Gavin Newsom just recently signed an ethnic studies bill in California. So and the research, there's some Stanford research out there looking at RCT Stanford research, in fact, looking at, which is, having a control design that shows that ethnic studies and using Black studies and Latinx studies actually increases the success of students of color, increases graduation rates, decreases dropout. So we have the research that supports that. So now let's move to the center. We were actually approached, and I have to be careful with some of the details here because we're still working on this, but we are approached by a press to do this work. So the center is is thinking about creating a collaboration to do the exact work that you're talking about, creating those materials, and then talking with state school board members about getting those courses like you see in Texas, like you see in California, the reddest of red states, the bluest of blue states. How can we get that those courses implemented either as electives or required courses by state boards of education? Those conversations, we're already having those conversations. And then on the training side, this past summer, we started something called the Professional Learning Series. You know, if you're a business school or you're a law school, there's a lot of professional training that those schools do. Now, there are some schools like USC who have been in this space, but the University of Kentucky, we haven't been in this space. And so I said to my faculty, we need to do this work. And so we did anti-racism. Candace Hargens did anti-racism training for teachers this past summer. Cheryl Matias did the representation of people of color in media course. And those courses, and I taught a course myself on school reform. And so rarely do teachers, more often, but the general public less often, have direct access to faculty in a Research One institution like University of Kentucky. So this professional learning series will be able to collaborate with the Civil Rights Center so that the general public and educators can have direct access to these courses.
Yeah, and let me pick up on that, Brother Turner. And this work is so critical. You mentioned something earlier, and I want to center this around why the University of Kentucky, because they may not be obvious, particularly to your Connecticut listeners and viewers. You mentioned that the University of Kentucky is a land grant institution, a public land grant institution. And I would maintain that in many ways, the University of Kentucky and Kentucky reflects a lot of where we are as a country. Certainly we have the big city like Louisville, and we had the Breonna Taylor situation, a murder. And, we certainly are grappling with that. Lexington is certainly a major city. Suburbs that look like many suburbs around the country and by Cincinnati, in rural areas, right, that reflect the country. And one of the things I'm impressed with the University of Kentucky is that they're using its resources to address the entire community, whether it's East Kentucky, Louisville, Lexington, Covington, all of those communities working, together. We have and then the other proud tradition that well is that certainly we had our white land grants, but we also had in the Confederate states, the Black land grants, the HBCUs. And we are so proud to have Kentucky State. And we're going to be working very closely with Dr. Brown, President Brown, and Kentucky State to do this work collaboratively as well. But what makes the land grant so powerful? It is that reciprocal relationship between the university and community, right? What makes and you use the word revolutionary, right? The land grant system is the great contribution of the United States to the higher education system, right? Democratizing education, breaking down the walls of the ivory tower, connecting research, teaching, and service to community. Now, very often we look at that in the agrarian context. Well, in 1865, the vast majority of people lived in agrarian communities, right? But that spirit has to be imbued in this work. And so I would say we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have to take that land grant spirit and modernize it and make it relevant to communities that we serve. The good news is that when we talk about education, we're talking about the entire community. And I've often said this work has to touch the entire community. I'll share one very quick story to talk about equitable access. One of the challenges I had at the University of Texas was to make sure that first generation students of color graduated in 4 years. And we created this program called the Longhorn Scholars Program. And one of the diagnostics is who had access to calculus. So we asked the students, and it was a racially diverse group. What we found and what we initially thought, was the students from Houston and San Antonio and Dallas. Those weren't the students. It was the students from rural areas and West Texas that did not have ready access to calculus. And so we have to be sensitive and thoughtful about these issues. You mentioned early childhood Head Start. as an anti-poverty program, perhaps one of the most successful anti-poverty programs, certainly help communities of color, but help all groups. So we have to find ways not just to address racial justice, which has to be at the core of what we do, but we have to find systems that help the entire community. Because I believe that if we find systems and strategies and remedies that help the entire community and break down some of these artificial barriers, I think we can begin to bring the country together in ways that, unfortunately, we're so divided right now, and we got to find ways to bring us together.
No problem. I'm interested to hear our silent guest, Camille. If your daughter can just give
Camille, why don't you come on? She's not. Believe me, she's not shy.
She's not shy.
She's not shy.
I'm just wondering. Well, there can be no Spelman sisters that are shy. There are many Spelman sisters at my university, and that's a rarity, and that sisterhood is still strong and going here. But Camille, listening to this idea, and that the NAACP and the university and the communities should have initiatives that deal with race, that deal with education. Could you give us maybe a younger pair of eyes view of that? She's probably muted.
Yes, I am muted. I wanted to think about that question for a second before I answered, but I think this collaboration is something that is needed, especially at a university where a lot of people of color go to. And since it's a state university, I think it's important to have this collaboration.
Oh,
just lost the mute there, but she'll come back on, and we'll get her view. We talked about story before, and I'm going to share a little story, but there's also another story here. The reason to do this is not to lift Black souls and brown souls. This is to lift all souls. So so I could look at my own life and say, because I was the last white boy living in my neighborhood, that I grew up in a different world. And if I wanted friends, my friends had to be people of color. And if I wanted to visit my friends' houses, that concept. But I want to bring it back. Everybody can have that. But Matthew Shepard, the young gay man in Wyoming who was beaten to death and left to freeze by two other white men who did this to him. His mother spoke at our university. I'm the literacy professor. So when there's something like Matthew Shepard's mother comes to speak, and I'm bring my teachers, just like any good professor would do. And we sat up in the front, and she gave a passionate talk, and the only kind of talk that mothers who have endured this kinds of pain and suffering and strength can give. But when we were leaving, I wasn't really paying attention, but me and my teachers were leaving, and she came over and she stopped us and she said, "Who are you?" And so I said, I'm Dr. Turner, and this is my class, and they're reading specialists, or they will be reading specialists in Connecticut. And then she said something to us that I'll never forget. She said, "Are you teaching them? What are you asking them to read? Because we are what we read." And she said, "My son's teachers fed him good books." And she named some: Bridget Terabithia, War Comes of Willie Freeman, books that we knew, like historical fiction books. And she said, "My son had a great understanding and empathy and a respect for all people." But she said about the two boys that murdered my son, "I wonder what they read, because I cannot believe they read the same books." So it's that concept and the research in Dr. Racine Sims Bishop, a friend of mine from Ohio University. Her research was around that. When I see myself, windows, mirrors, and sliding doors, she called it. And she said, literature improves everyone's life. But her point was, when I see myself in the book, my comprehension rises automatically. It's schema. It's the background. So her point has always been, what are we feeding? what are the books we're asking children of color to do? So I'm excited about not only the disseminating of the research, but this curriculum, this listening. And the research also shows that if I have one Black teacher, just one white, if white children have just one Black teacher, their education improves.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the research.
Yeah.
So,
brother, yeah. Let me pick up on that. You raised, I mean, again, this has been such a rich discussion for me and brought back so many points, but let me hit on a couple of points that you raised. One of the initiatives and one of the things when I talk with my brothers and sisters who lead historically Black colleges and universities, one of their initiatives, almost without exception, is producing, making teaching an honorable profession. One of the ugly byproducts of desegregation was the closing of Black schools, where there were so many Black teachers, and we just don't see that as a preferred profession as we did in the past. And one of the things, as we know, that led the Montgomery bus boycott, it were the teachers in Montgomery and the professors at Alabama State that really led, certainly Dr. King, but it was certainly the backbone of that were those professionals, because they had stability, right? So I agree with you that getting more teachers, I didn't have, again, I grew up in the New York City schools. I did not have my first Black teacher until I was in 11th grade in high school. So I wanted to give that perspective. Although I had some exceptional teachers who cared and loved me, and I wanted to use that as a quick example to illustrate your other point. I was in, I was in 11th grade English, American literature, and I was doing well, but I wasn't engaged. And my teacher recognized that. And he said, I see you're doing the work, but it doesn't seem like you're into it. I said, well, I don't see myself in it. We're reading The Great Gatsby, we're reading these other books, and I'm like, they don't inspire me. He said, he assigned to not just me, the entire class, Black boy. And that respect, that responsiveness says a lot to me, and I so appreciate it. And he actually wrote my recommendation to college, and he talked about that point. But that respect, that engagement, but the fact that in the first place it wasn't there. All, to your point, all great books, but did not reflect the full humanity and the full literature, right? And I think it was a good lesson for him. It spoke to the need for us to be advocates, right? But and it also just gives light to the research you were citing.
No problem. Now we're coming to the last 2 minutes of the show. It has been a fascinating discussion. The initiative has lifted my heart. It's given me hope. I need to be coming down to the University of Kentucky, for some of them symposiums and things. We need to get that down.
You need to come down.
You gotta get the vaccine first.
Yeah, you
get the vaccine first. That's true.
And come down during basketball season, because if you saw my guy Jamal Murray, the Wildcats are not playing around. So, but good.
All right. So we've got the last final words that you get to say. So, Gregory, while you're on the screen, give us your wish for the initiative in like 30 seconds.
Yeah. Freedom, truth, justice, health.
All right. I'm there with that. Julian?
Well, I think that academics have a sacred responsibility. You have foundations and you have billionaires and you have politicians all weighing in on education. And I think it's our sacred responsibility to make good information available to communities so that they can act on that information as they see fit. Knowing that we aren't purchased, that we have this special role as being tenured faculty to call the shots based on how what the research tells us. And I just think that this initiative, the other things that we're doing, the professional learning series for teachers and for community, our hiring of diverse faculty, recruiting diverse students, that's all part of our greater work to be more relevant, to be more engaged, and uphold that sacred responsibility that that the taxpayers and our community has entrusted us with.
All right, Dick, we could not end on a better note, that education is a sacred responsibility. My research on the Tohono O'odham Reservation gives us a warning, though. Native peoples thought that the education system being placed upon them would be a sacred mission. But really what I'm looking at with the center's work is to help us really honestly make it a sacred mission, to decolonize a nation, to unimpress people. When, Paulo Freire said pedagogy of the oppressed, but we also have that pedagogy of hope that he wrote. So I'm leaving today with a pedagogy of hope at the University of Kentucky with Dr. Vasquez, Dr. Vincent, and Camille, who will be a student at our university. Yeah. Yeah. All right. God bless the one with forever.
Blessings, and I know that for certain. Keep on working, open curtains, haters swerving, cause they ain't ready for your final version. I'm never gonna give up, fall down, I just gotta get up, yeah. Cause this is my road, lights, camera,